Hi, and welcome to Prepping Essentials. More than 3 years have passed since the majority public decision was made that the UK should leave the European Union. Yet our politicians continue to bicker, argue and delay the implementation of that decision. The leaving date has been put back 3 times, and as the most recent leaving date of the 31st of October draws ever closer, the politicians seem hell-bent on pushing through yet another delay to the leaving date, possibly until the end of January next year. Protest groups on both sides of the Brexit argument grow ever larger, more vocal and, more recently, more violent. And there's growing concern that if we fail to leave the EU on the 31st of October, we could see widespread civil disorder breaking out across the UK. So what should you be thinking about to be prepared? Let's find out. The UK is no stranger to incidents of civil disorder, but usually these are very localised, involving small numbers of people protesting about minority issues, and they're usually brought under control very quickly. However, in the case of Brexit, the number of people with strong views are much larger than usual, and they're spread across the entire country rather than being restricted to one particular town or city. No wonder then that both government and the police are voicing their concerns and making contingency plans to deal with the anger that will inevitably be felt by whichever side ends up being disappointed at the final Brexit result. Whatever the political decision, there will be a large group of people who will be very unhappy and who might resort to civil unrest to try and reverse the decision. If the UK actually does end up leaving the EU, then it's inevitable that there'll be some form of disruption to the flow of trade between the UK and mainland Europe. The cost and complexity for goods clearing through our customs at the border will definitely increase, and because of our just-in-time supply chain, this could lead to temporary shortages of goods in the shops and, in time, an increase in the price of goods imported from the EU. Either of these things could also act as a catalyst for civil unrest as supermarket shelves empty or families try to cope with the sudden spike in prices. Civil disorder can occur at any time and for a multitude of reasons, not just because of Brexit. So, as a prepper, you should always have this on your list of risks to be prepared for. The first thing to think about would be the travel chaos caused by any large-scale protest groups and demonstrations. Here in the UK, we only need to think back a few months to remember the chaos caused in London by the climate change protesters, who managed to cause travel gridlock across the whole of London by blocking off key streets, road junctions and bridges. Their sheer scale of numbers, coupled with their simple refusal to move, meant that the police could do very little other than watch and simply wait for them to go away. So imagine if this happened in your town or city. How would you get to work? What about getting the kids to school or going to the supermarket for your weekly shopping? Or what about refueling the car at the petrol station? The truth is that if civil unrest on a similar scale to the climate change protests in London were repeated across multiple towns and cities, then the police would be completely overwhelmed and the entire country could be gridlocked. You should also remember that if your travel plans are disrupted, then so too will be the travel plans of the trucks delivering essential supplies to your supermarkets and petrol stations. It will also block the routes of the fire, ambulance or other essential services that we all depend on. So with that in mind, you should take a look at your long-term stores of food and fuel and consider if you need to top them up now while you still can. The next thing to consider is your personal safety while out and about in public spaces. So far, we've only seen quite small-scale protests with limited violence, and these have been mainly held in London and the area immediately around Parliament. As Brexit Day gets closer, these could easily spread to many towns and cities around the country, including yours, and both the frequency and levels of violence could also increase. It's therefore worth considering what action you would take in order to avoid the potential for getting caught up in areas where protests might be taking place. You should certainly monitor the news media in your area, including social media, so you can be informed when any protest action has been planned or when any civil disorder is actually taking place. The best defence is simply not to be there. If you come across a protest group while you're out on foot or in the car, simply turn around and leave. If you're in a shop as a protest group passes by, then move to the rear of the shop, well away from the entrance door and the windows. Then once they've passed, leave the area immediately. You don't want to get caught up in any violence or property damage being caused by the protesters, as when anger turns to violence, even innocent bystanders can and do become targets. Similarly, the police will usually treat anyone in the crowd as being a legitimate target, even if you're not. So if you don't want to be mistaken for a protester, then simple answer is don't be there. Continuing with the theme of personal safety, one final thing for you to consider is the subject of home defence. Civil disorder is not necessarily restricted to the main streets of towns and cities, and not necessarily in the form of politically motivated protest marches. Whenever public protests, demonstrations or other forms of civil disorder take place, the more criminal element within society take this as an excuse and a cover for their own criminal activity. They can easily disguise themselves as part of the crowd, and they also know that if the police are tied up dealing with protest groups, then they can commit criminal acts elsewhere without the fear of the police turning up to catch them. Any large-scale civil disorder will quickly spread to residential areas, so it's worth taking the time to consider how secure your home might be and to take steps to try and make some improvements. If you have gates and fences around your property, then you could look to see if they could be strengthened or raised in height. You should also look at your doors, windows and any other external openings and see if better or extra locks and bolts can be fitted, and if you could prefabricate some wood to cover the glazed areas, or perhaps buy some plastic window film to cover the glass if you get an indication that civil unrest might be starting to break out. Take a look around the outside of your home and see if there's anything lying around which could be used either to gain entry into the home or which you'd prefer not to get damaged. This could include things like tools, ladders, garden furniture, and of course the family car. You should also bear in mind the risk from fire, especially since petrol bombs are frequently used in many of the more violent protest marches or other outbreaks of civil disorder. If you don't already have them, buy a garden hose and some fire extinguishers. As a last resort, and where legal, consider what weapons you might have to hand in the home as a means of self-defense if intruders do manage to gain entry into your home. Well, that's it for this video. I do hope that you found something in there that was of use to you. If you did like the video, then please do click on the like button. Also feel free to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. As always, welcome any comments, questions or suggestions you might have. Just leave them in the comments section below. But for now, thanks for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.